Hey everyone, I'm Teresa. Welcome back to my channel, Lost My Thread. Today we are not going to have a little intro because I am doing the 5 questions, 1 take challenge. This is a video you might have seen going around on Sewing YouTube. It actually was created or brought back from a previous similar challenge by Lindsey from Inside the Hem. I'm in a sewing vlogger Facebook group, and Lindsey has lots of really fun ideas to get the whole sewing vlogging community all together, trying some little challenges together. This is the first one, and I think it's really a lot of fun, and it's a way that you can possibly find a little bit more about me if you don't know me, and also other sewing vloggers if you don't know them. So we're all going to be answering the same 5 questions, and we're only allowed 1 take of the video. So hopefully we won't have any huge hiccups, but it's going to be what it's going to be. So the first question we're all supposed to be answering is, what has your sewing journey looked like? I have talked about this a little bit before in a Q&A video, so I'll pop a link to it where I might get into a little bit more detail. But I learned to sew in high school properly. I would say that when I was a kid, I would play around a little bit with my mom's sewing machine, often without permission. I did used to, as a teenager, put little inserts into the sides of my jeans to make like a bell-bottom kind of look, which was pretty cool. I didn't know a lot about fabric, and often I used drapey fabric inside denim, and it didn't work as great as I had envisioned, but it was still a lot of fun. I do remember my mom teaching me to hand sew because I'd asked her to. So I went to Catholic school, and in my whole childhood we were wearing school uniforms, classic plaid school uniform skirts, and when you first buy them they are really long, kind of most of the way down your leg, kind of mid-calf, and nobody wore them that length. You wore them just above the knee. So I wanted to always get mine hemmed, and my mom would hem mine and my sister's, and I remember probably when I was about 9 years old, I saw my mom hemming them, and I asked her if I could learn to do it so that I could hem my skirts. So she gave me a needle and thread and scissors and set me up, and I remember hemming my skirt. And I think pretty much from there on in, I was the one hemming my skirts while she carried on hemming my older sister's skirts because she didn't really have an interest in sewing. But when I was in high school, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more interesting and outside of the normal general education requirements when I was a junior in high school, so when I was kind of 16, 17, and I saw the Sewing 101 basic sewing class available. I debated whether I wanted to do sewing or cooking. I felt like they were both really good life skills, and I wanted to have both. And I decided that cooking was probably easier to teach yourself than just like basics of sewing. And I think I made the right choice because I do cook, and I have figured out how to cook on my own. Sewing would have been more of a challenge. So the Sewing 101 class was super basic. You learned how to thread a sewing machine, you learned how to read a sewing pattern, you had to do something for your top half, or first for your bottom half actually, and I made a pair of pajama pants which were semi-disastrous, but technically a pair of pajama pants. I managed to make them with an elastic waist and everything. And then you also had to then, at the second part of the class, make something for your top half. So that could be like a shirt or a dress. And I remember making a dress with a lap zipper in the back, and that came out a bit better. So I would say that was overall a success. I was hoping in the next year to take, there was like an advanced sewing class, but unfortunately there weren't that many people interested, and we weren't able to do it. So I had to just basically learn to teach myself from that point on. I really did just learn a lot from sewing patterns. At that point it was Big 4. This is talking about kind of late 90s, 2000 kind of period. And I learned a lot from the Big 4 patterns, and there wasn't as many resources online. So I just did a whole lot of sewing, getting stuck, sleeping on it, coming back and rereading instructions, sewing something up, unpicking my stitches, trying it a different way. And eventually I learned a lot of the techniques largely from myself, honestly. And I've pretty much been sewing since then, I would say. I have been sewing more and less at points when I've been more caught up in other creative activities, or my life has been busy at other points. But I would say that the only period where I wasn't really sewing was a period from about 2017 to 2019, because I had an injury on my shoulder. I'm a midwife, and there's a lot of kind of similar repetitive motions that you do, a lot of twisting and bending when you're catching babies, listening to babies' heartbeats in labor and stuff like that. And I ended up hurting my shoulder, and it was really a struggle to do pretty much anything with my arm, with my shoulders. I couldn't lift very high. I couldn't even bring my arm up to like a mouse to work for a while. I had to be off sick for a long time. Sewing was completely out of the question, and it was definitely one of those things that once I was able to start sewing again, it felt like a huge triumph. So for one, it was like I was able to do some of the physical activities that I couldn't, because I'm not, I'm young. It's really not a good thing that I was already being so unable to move my body and use my body. And I don't want to be like that going forward in my life. Obviously, there are all kinds of people with all kinds of abilities, and most of them do really well with what they can do. But I wanted to get to a point where I could do what I was doing before. And so being able to sew again was a huge triumph from like a recovery point of view. But then also it was that I was able to be doing things for me again. So I was able to be unleashing my creativity in a way that I really loved to do it. And I felt so much more like myself. It was so wonderful to be able to sew and make something again. And I started an Instagram page around that time for my sewing. And since then I've just been really kind of diving into the sewing community. I should say that when I was still recovering and I wasn't able to sew at all was when I found the Love to Sew podcast, which is my favorite sewing podcast. And when I was listening to that, I started to learn much more about the online sewing world and indie sewing patterns that I didn't even know were a thing, and sewing Instagram and sewing YouTube. And I completely went down a rabbit hole. So by the time that I was physically able to sew again, I was already kind of full-on obsessed with it again. So it's been really cool to be able to take it from that recovery point from 2019, and I've grown so much in my sewing progress since then. I feel like I've kind of ramped up the level of sewing enthusiasm and different projects I've been willing to try, and it's been really cool. I need to take some little breaks for tea, so I've got a little herbal tea here, so sorry about the pauses. I would normally edit them out, but one take. Okay, second question is describe your sewing space. You are basically in my sewing space. My sewing space is this tiny corner. It is a sewing wall. So I have a shared room that I sew in. On the other half of the room is a lot of music equipment. So my husband's got some guitars and amplifiers and stuff because he makes music. Next to me as well, just kind of over this way on this wall, we have the computer, which is a shared computer. It's where I do my video editing. My husband does recording and writing and whatever else. It's like our personal like home computer kind of space. And this section is everything for me for sewing. So normally when I'm not sewing, my sewing machines are covered up and everything's tucked away like this. This is a folding table that then folds up. So I just fold up one half of it and then I can pull myself up, pull the machines out, and I can sew right at this space. Because it's a shared space, I do have to keep it relatively tidy. I close everything up again at the end of my sewing session. It's not a huge thing to lug everything out into another room and set up, though I do occasionally move things into the kitchen. If my husband's in here and he needs to be using this room, I might take my machines out to the kitchen table and sew there. But usually it's here. I have done a little bit of refurbing of this space where I painted the wall last year and I put up these cubes that I can store a lot of my sewing stuff. I built a chest of drawers that's behind me that houses a lot of my sewing stuff as well. So though it's just one little wall space, I've done quite a lot to make it my own. I did do a sewing room tour video as well, and I think it's pretty similar to what it was before. So I'll pop a link to that if you want to see in much more detail, if you like to look in all my little storage solutions and things like that. But this is my sewing space. It's in pretty much every one of my videos, so you get to see it a lot. Okay. Number 3, what is it like to be a sewing YouTuber? Now I would say that I didn't have a huge amount of expectations. I think it was fairly realistic, but what I would say that is different from what I expected is I probably enjoy the process a little bit more than I thought I might, just from the creative side of it, of editing and filming and lighting and those kinds of things I quite enjoy. I used to do theater as well. I did a theater in high school and I did a year in university studying acting as well. And I've always enjoyed all aspects of theater and the lighting and the sound and all that. So it's kind of some of that. So obviously film is different from theater, but it's not, it's in the genre. And it's been fun to be able to actually be a part of that as well, and sort of from the editing perspective. But as far as making videos and sharing them out with people, I didn't know how it was going to be, and I did think it might feel a little bit odd and awkward at points. And I do think when people find out that I have a sewing YouTube channel, I do feel slightly awkward about it. And I think a lot of the people who are in my personal life who find out, they don't sew. They don't ever watch any sewing videos. So they don't really know what sewing YouTube specifically is like. And I think they might have different ideas of what my channel would be like than what it actually is. But yeah, it's something that I do for fun. I don't necessarily do it for the kudos. So I do feel a little bit just sheepish when people want to talk to me about my channel or congratulate me on my followers or something like that, because honestly, I'm just doing it because it's fun and I enjoy it. And I really love interacting with all of you out there as well. That's something that I have loved that I wasn't necessarily expecting when I set up this channel. I have some really interesting, unique, all kinds of people watching my channel, and it's really fun to get to interact with you guys in the comments or in emails or on Instagram as well. All right, number 4, describe your most memorable sewing project. I thought about this when I heard the question. There's quite a few things that I feel like I could talk about, and I have made some quite memorable things. I made my prom dress, I made my wedding dress, I made a really cool coat last year, the year before, I think it was the year before last, that I fully waterproofed. It was the Kelly Anorak by Closet Core Patterns that I fully waterproofed. I hand quilted, well, I didn't hand quilt, I quilted the lining that I put inside it as well. It was very much one of these great slow sewing projects, and it's something that I really loved the whole process of, and I shared a lot of that over on my Instagram. But I was thinking one that I think helped me to learn a little bit about myself as a person, and is definitely a very memorable one, is when I made a costume for a friend of mine. Now this is going back to when I was probably 20 years old, 19 years old maybe. And one of the things that I really wanted to do when I learned to sew was to make my own Halloween costumes. My mom made our Halloween costumes growing up, and I thought that was just the coolest thing ever. There was one year when I was making my Halloween costume, and I feel like it must have been about 2 weeks before the Halloween party that we were throwing in the apartment that I lived in. My cousin and my best friend lived there, and we threw a huge Halloween party every year that was epic. And we always did really great sort of decorations around. There were jello shots. Her dad would make pizzas all night, and it was always a whole lot of fun. And I was making my own costume for it, and like I said, about 2 weeks before the party, one of my friends asked me if I would make a costume for her, specifically Rainbow Bright costume. Now, I will say that there was no Rainbow Bright costume pattern out there, so I had to just take some kind of sewing pattern that I could find and adapt it and figure out a way to make her some kind of arm warmers and leg warmers. If you're not familiar with Rainbow Bright, she's a cartoon from the 80s, from when I was a kid, when we were kids, and I'll post a picture up so you can see what she looks like, but you can have some idea of what I was trying to work toward. And my friend asked me very last minute, and I said, yeah, okay, I don't mind doing it. It seems like it would be a fun project. We went fabric shopping, we looked at patterns, I did some measurements, and I made a costume for her. And then the night before the party, she came over to my house to try it on and check if she, it fit and it all was good and everything. I was still working on my own costume at this point. So the night before the party, I hadn't finished my costume. I was working very hard on it, but it was a whole to-do, that whole costume, and I was a little bit distracted by making my friend's costume. So I got her to try it on, and as soon as she put it on, she decided that she didn't really like the leg warmers as we designed them. So I had measured her calves, and I had made these leg warmers to be like perfect, right up to the knee. They were exactly the width of her legs, like they fit her like a glove. And she decided that she thought it would look better if they were over boots, if she could have these leg warmers over a pair of boots rather than just over her legs and then whatever shoes she was wearing. Now, as you can imagine, I was not very excited to hear that she, A, wasn't happy with what I had done. She didn't thank me for any of the work that I'd done. She just told me what she didn't like about it. Also, she knew that I still had my own costume to finish that night, and I was going to have to somehow figure out a way of drafting a whole nother pair of leg warmers to fit a pair of boots that I didn't even have. So I didn't even know what size boots these were, how big these leg warmers were going to be. I told her that I didn't think I was going to be able to do it, that I felt like it was a little bit unrealistic and unfair for me to do that the night before the party. Her response was to go home, get the boots, and bring them over so that I could at least know what size the boots needed to be. I really wasn't sure if I was going to make them or not, because I was pretty irritated at that point, to be honest. I was not impressed at all. I decided I was going to finish my costume first, and then if I had time, I was going to carry on, see what I could do with getting her costume finished with the new leg warmers. So I finished my own costume, and I worked on hers, and I stayed up very late, well into the night. My sister was there trying to support me because she felt really bad and was really annoyed that my friend friend, I should say, was asking me to do this at such short notice, and knowing that I was going to be staying up so late before our party when I should be decorating and preparing for the party. So my sister was plying me with coffee. So I was just drinking like tons of coffee. I think it must have been about kind of 2 o'clock in the morning, something along those lines, where I was getting right to the end of finishing the project, and I spilled a cup of coffee all over her dress. Like all over, including the white sections. It looked like a disaster. At that point, I honestly I lost it, and I just started laughing so much. I think it was definitely tiredness, hysteria kicking in, but I could not stop laughing. My sister was really freaking out because she thought I'd like completely lost my mind because I couldn't stop laughing. But I am the kind of person where something will start to bother me and annoy me, but if it gets to a point where it's just so extremely upsetting, I just have to see the funny side, and it just starts to become amusing to me. So I laughed absolutely uproariously, went into the bathroom, washed what I could of the coffee out of the dress, put it in the washing machine. Miraculously, it was totally fine, and all the coffee came out, and obviously, at that point, I'd finished the dress. I gave her the dress to wear the next day to the party. I think I got a very cursory, oh, thanks, thanks for making this. Not very much of a appreciation of everything that I put into it, even knowing about the whole coffee incident, me staying up super late to do it. Needless to say, she is not my friend anymore. We are no longer in touch. I feel like I learned a lot from that process. I am someone who used to struggle a lot with saying no. I know many people out there are going to agree. I'm much better at saying no now. I am much better at appreciating that I am as valuable as anyone else. And if somebody's asking me to do something, I need to weigh up the pros and cons and how that's going to affect me as much as the pros and cons of what they're going to get out of it. And if anything like that happened now, I would never have said yes to that kind of request, especially with that kind of notice. But I was young, I was 20, I wanted to do something fun for my friend, and I regretted it. But you know what? That costume was freaking amazing. I'm so proud of how it came out. I think it was honestly one of the coolest things that I made, especially back in that early period. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures to show you because I decided that I didn't really want to have pictures of a friend that I no longer want to think about. But I'm telling you about it now. Maybe that will then let it kind of get away from me, and it'll no longer be something that just kind of sits in my negative sewing memory banks. But it was definitely a memorable project, and I thought it was worth sharing with those of you who might be able to sympathize with the woes that I went through. Okay, final question. What is one quote, saying, piece of advice that you've gotten that resonates with your sewing or YouTube success? I feel like there's probably a lot that I could point to, but one that I think is a really nice one that I loved, which is something that Caroline from the Love to Sew podcast said, was don't compare your beginning to somebody else's middle. This was an episode that I really liked of their podcast. It was called Community Over Competition, and I feel like this whole challenge that Lindsey has created kind of enforces that idea that I feel like as sewers, as sewing vloggers, and people who have sewing businesses, I feel like as a whole, we're going to get a whole lot more out of this community if we promote and support each other and put each other forward, rather than trying to feel like we're supposed to be competing with people and being better than people or judging ourselves against others. But definitely, as far as looking at where you are on your journey, for me as a sewist, but certainly as a YouTuber, I'm very new at making videos on YouTube, and it is completely unfair and unrealistic to look at videos from someone who's been making them for 5-10 years and feel like I should be at their level. That is just not reasonable. That's never gonna happen. And I feel like honestly, you could take that in so many other ways outside of the whole sewing and vlogging world. If you are doing anything for the first time, if you're at a new job and you're getting down on yourself after the first week because you don't know everything, it's like, yeah, because you have barely been doing it. You're not going to be as good as someone who's been doing this job for 10 years until you've been doing it for 10 years, or maybe a little earlier if you're lucky, but you shouldn't expect yourself to be at a super high standard when you're just starting out. And I think that's something that everyone could take, whether they are sewist, vlogger, creative, or just living your life, honestly. So that's one that I really love. So thank you, Caroline from Love to Sew. And I really want to say a huge thank you to Lindsey for putting these questions together, for really gathering us up as a community and supporting all of us. And she even gave me a shout out on one of her videos recently. Lindsey is such a sweetheart. I really do appreciate that. And I do my best to give shout outs to other sewing vloggers when I like their videos. And so I try to kind of bring that into my videos whenever I can. But huge thank you to Lindsey. Please do check out the hashtag 5 questions, 1 take, and you will see lots of other sewing vloggers. I found new ones that I didn't know about recently, and I know that you will too. If you enjoy my videos, no reason you're not going to enjoy others. If you are new to my channel and you want to see more of what I'm doing, please do have a look through some of my other videos. Subscribe if you want to see more of my videos as well. If you enjoyed hearing my 5 questions, 1 take, do give me a thumbs up as well. And I will see you all soon with another video. Bye!